Welcome to the deep dive for this week. Don't forget to visit the website at deepdiveau.net. Check out our socials and Patreon page at the Deep Dive AU. Subscribe via your favourite podcast app or like and subscribe at our YouTube page at the Deep Dive AU.
The Deep Dive podcast mugs are now available for purchase and are currently on sale. Just go to our merchandise page at deepdiveau.net to purchase one. Don't miss out on this opportunity to grab one for yourself or as a thoughtful gift for a fellow podcast enthusiast.
This is the Deep Dive Podcast. And here is your host, Michael Coles.
Lil Desille is an AudHD registered clinical psychologist. Lil uses her personal experiences along with evidence-based practice to work with neurodivergent individuals. Her special interests include neurodivergence, mind-body connection, sexual health, dating, intimacy, attachment, and spirituality. Lil is an AAPI and WPATH professional member. In her spare time, you will find Lil doing a select few activities, including spending time with her cats, Subu and Eos, doing yoga, and sitting in front of the heater watching her favourite TV show. Lil Desille, welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here.
Okay, so what are the common challenges neurodivergent individuals face in intimate relationships, and how can that be addressed?
Well, just like everybody else, there's a lot of the time, effort, energy-based ones, but the more common for neurodivergent specific difficulties and differences would be rejection sensitivity, being a really large proponent, of lots of common conflicts, processing time differences and processing generally differences, and communication differences, which I think plays a large role across the board with many couple difficulties, but even more so particularly with autistic ADHDers. And on top of that, social differences too. So those, things that are very commonly associated with our neurotypes. And the ways that, we want to be able to support individuals is by looking at what exactly it is that you're struggling with. Is it an individual difficulty that we're having in the relationship, or is it a mutually incompatible kind of difference where someone might be, let's say, not the best with their time management as opposed to someone who really needs to be early and on time? How can we look at that difference, and how can we kind of put things in between in place where there's strategies and support systems essentially to navigate that for them?
Okay, so how can neurodivergent couples enhance their emotional and physical intimacy?
Learning about their neurotype, firstly. I think a big part of identification is a really crucial part of the relationship itself. So understanding yourself, the triggers that you do have as an individual in the emotional front, and also learning how to communicate with each other directly. So you said emotional, and did you also say physical as well?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And learning about different touch profiles. So there are some people as well that do have more sensitivities and preferences with touch. So really understanding and learning about yourself, once again, going back to self, to understand about your physical needs, your compatibility needs, and then working with your partner. Do I need light touch? Do I need deep touch? When is the right time to connect in with you? And really just having broad discussions about this.
Okay, so what strategies can help rebuild trust in neurodivergent relationships after a breach of trust?
Okay, so there's a few different things, but the first one is offering grace. I think very seldom do we give grace to our partner that they don't intentionally always try to hurt us, ideally. But that being said as well, we are also more vulnerable population groups. We do and are more susceptible to harm. So, take that with a grain of salt when I say the offering grace bit. But you need to collaborate to rebuild trust. So that involves the person on the end of the betrayal, where they need to be able to lean into giving opportunities for the person who's betrayed the trust to make it up to them. But identifying what does trust rebuilding look like to you? For some people, that might be temporarily closing the dynamic if they're in like an open or a polyamorous relationship. It might be that they have access to different accounts if they really need it, but it needs to be consensual and mutual. So it needs to be a matter of collaborating on what that trust looks like and giving people a chance. So, not choosing to punish your partner if you are choosing to forgive and work together. And by that, I mean, yes, you can absolutely keep it in mind. The hurt should not be something that goes away that easily. But we also want to keep in mind that if someone is trying to make these bids for connection and showing that they are trustworthy, you need to then make the decision, am I going to lean into that and start to try to lean into trust? Or can I just genuinely not forgive it? And at this point, maybe I need to remove myself from the relationship itself.
Okay, so that sounds very interesting. How does non-sexual physical touch impact neurodivergent partnerships, and what are effective ways to incorporate that?
So, non-sexual physical touch is the act of interacting and touching your partner in a way that is not tied to sexual, acts. So, this could be things like high fives, hugs, even forehead kisses. It's the idea that sex is not the fundamental piece of trying to create intimacy. So, this actually reduces pressure of having to have sex with a partner. But with the touch preference sensitivities, we also want to consider, what types of touch are needed. So, like I said before, with like light touch or deep pressure, you want to understand whether even physical contact is great, if it's better to be skin to skin, or if you have a partner with sensory needs that would prefer material, perhaps you can also hug them with a blanket. You can find mini strategies in order to connect with your partner physically and deepen their sense of emotional and physical safety without threatening their nervous systems, particularly the sensory nervous system too.
That sounds very interesting. So what role do neuromodulators play in the intimacy experienced by neurodivergent individuals?
Okay, so we've got so many different neuromodulators, but neuromodulators that play a larger role in intimacy building. Dopamine, vasopressin, oxytocin are probably the top three that I'll speak to. So dopamine, contrary to everyone saying that ADHDers lack dopamine, we don't lack dopamine. We're not in a deficit of dopamine. Our dopamine transporters are just working too fast, too quickly, and so they're fizzling out. We're not getting enough to the brain in the way that we need to, but they're not. It's not that we're lacking it. It's just the reuptake that's the difficulty with the transporters, right? So in the start of relationships, we're really full of excitement. Dopamine's all about motivation and this sense of reward to some degree. So it plays a large role in the initial phases. And that's why a lot of relationships can be relationship jumps from next one to next one sometimes, because dopamine drops when we begin to feel and establish safety. When we begin to establish safety in our relationships and bonding, we release oxytocin. And so oxytocin is that good love, like bonding hormone, and it's a really, really beautiful one. Parents who breastfeed also tend to do that when they're connecting with their child. And basically, when that is coming in, a lot of people tend to panic. They start to do that freak out moment of, oh my gosh, what's happening? Like, is this relationship safe anymore? And because we're so used to the go, go, go and the dopamine that comes in as like a beautiful flood, we need to just start to firstly unpack those and just remember, no, this is safety that's forming. This is the gradual progression. What this means is we're leaning into a nicer place. So this is where you want to include things that maintain dopamine while still in the same partnership. And so that might be novelty-based actions. It might be doing things that you really like. It might be incorporating some competitiveness or a sense of urgency, all of those things which can help fuel with the dopamine. And then also vasopressin. So vasopressin is like a stress / bonding kind of hormone in itself as well. It is released predominantly with people who have more dominance in testosterone. And this is like problem solving, challenging. So kind of going back to that, acronym that I said before, which is INCU, which is the interest, novelty, competitiveness, and urgency. That's something that can also help to support and facilitate. And that helps with longer term social bonding behaviors and complex strategy focus. So that helps you when you're kind of in those conflicts as well. So those are like the three main ones. There are also other ones, of course, too, but those are the ones that we see in relationships and how we have to navigate those in order to be able to support our brains in our partnership.
Yeah, it sounds really fascinating what you've actually described. So what are the benefits of attending a couples retreat focused on neurodivergent relationships? And can you tell us more about those?
Absolutely can. So this is like my little passion project that I really, really love. So we've done now 2, we're doing a 3rd next year, and all of the focus is it's neurodivergent led. So my partner and I are both autistic ADHDers. I'm a clinical psychologist and my partner does Reiki and is a facilitator in that. And it's really about looking at so many different components. Firstly, your individual identity. So in a neuroaffirming way, it's one of the only, not even just retreats, but spaces where I believe that we embrace and, encourage unmasking. It is one of the spaces that also allows you to connect not only with your partner at a deeper level, but also with neurokin around you. Really getting this sense of, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And so what we've noticed is it's not only just about connecting with other people, it's connecting deeply with your partner, deeply with yourself. It's learning about emotional regulation strategies, how to communicate in a way that supports you and your partnership, not changing the communication style, but actually identifying these are our differences in communication style. And this is how we can find strategies in the middle that don't allow us to, compromise on who we are, still really baked in that authenticity piece that's really, really important. So our retreats focus on physical, emotional, sensual, spiritual, and physical intimacy, all of those. So we cover over so many different topics.
Okay, so how can neurodivergent individuals explore and understand their romantic relationships or partnerships through self-reflection? And how do you do that at the retreat?
So a lot of our workshops are very open-ended. So we have a lot of facilitated discussions. Lots of them do go on tangents, which I actually kind of love because it then trails off into different areas as well. But to self-reflect, we have a 130-page booklet that people can go through with resources. There's prompts, there's cues, there's questions, and it's really also about sharing information with each other. When other people share information about their experiences, it sort of has a flow-on effect where other people feel safe to share their own. And so by default, there is this really, really beautiful interest piece. We had a really beautiful chat about limerence, which wasn't actually a topic at our retreat. And then I've now embedded it in for our next retreat because it actually brought on such a large and beautiful discussion. So I think open-ended, facilitated discussions is probably the best way for self-reflection. And we also do have a segment where we separate people into split groups to focus on the individual parts of the relationship too.
Okay, sounds fantastic. So how can neurodivergent individuals increase their desire within a relationship between two people?
Okay, so the main things you want to think about with anything to do with desire. So relationship satisfaction and sexual satisfaction are two different things. Relationship satisfaction, the information actually, it goes against and counters against desire. So desire needs novelty, distance, uncertainty, and safe relationships obviously need familiarity, safety, security, predictability. So you need a balance of the two. But to fuel desire, this can be things like building anticipation. Maybe you're texting a partner or messaging with a partner of the things that you'd like to do with them later. Being able to fuel desire as well by watching your partner in real time, getting passionate, or in the moments that you first were attracted to them can be a really, really beautiful thing too. And it can also be about getting them to get engaged in their special interests. More often than not, our partners look so beautiful when they're so immersed in the things that they love doing and talking about. So I think that those are really, really big ones. But one thing as well to keep in mind is that sometimes it doesn't come as naturally for us. So sometimes we actually need to fuel the desire too. That might be actively and consciously going on dates or actively and consciously dressing up in a way that makes us feel very attractive and desirable, or highlighting and reflecting moments where you do feel those things, even if it's not necessarily with your partner, doing them more to bring that out in yourself, which will naturally also bring that out within your partner.
So going on some technical aspects and stuff like that of psychology. Now, I've basically never heard of this. What is the SPI profile?
Yes, so the SPI profile it's basically like this disability index, right? Because disability is neutral. And it's really looking at sexual health and sexual connection and the barriers that might be getting in the way as a means of helping you to identify how we can have healthier, happier, better sex or sexual experiences, so to speak. So there's an element S, which is for social, which is really looking at all the different dynamics. You know, what areas where I might have some difficulties or differences. So that might be I struggle to express myself, but on the other end, it might be that the receptive nature is easier. So I might be able to understand what people are saying, but maybe I need some support with articulating. In that instance, that might be that I incorporate AACs, like augmentative and alternative like communication as such. P is for performance, so things that might be impacting upon the physicality nature of it. So that might be to do with mobility aids, that might be to do with mental health, which might impact our desire to integrate more, that kind of stuff. E is for emotional, which is really all about things like alexithymia, so the difficulty with identifying what emotions are happening for us, whether we have rejection sensitivity experiences and triggers, if we have specific emotional triggers, how we have our coping mechanisms in place. S is for sensory, which I think speaks to itself, so identifying if there's a hypo or a hypersensitive profile. I is for influential, so factors that do impact us in our day-to-day lives that might be outside of that scope, and O is for other. Now, all of those combined really it has like a little added calculation which looks at the differences in where you might need the most supports, and that's something that you can take to your site that's something that you could take to, an OT or another health clinician, where they can unpack with you different strategies from there with how to support and bolster up supports for making that happier, healthier sex life.
Okay. So do you actually sort of work with other sort of like allied health professionals in terms of like implementing the SPI profile?
So I have with a few clinicians. So the SPI profile I made about, I think, 2 years ago. And I've worked with 2 or 3 OTs specifically, and I think 1 or maybe 2 other psychologists with it too. So I actually haven't utilized it with other clinicians too much. Some people do it for themselves where they want to incorporate their own, but just to have a bit more of a clarified sense of what's going on for me, and then making their own, I guess, interpretation of what it is that they need for their accommodations. But I do have a whole list of accommodations as well as strategies at the bottom too, just so that it's all quite supported.
Okay, so how can neurodivergent individuals navigate dating and forming new relationships?
So we want to make sure that we have our red flags, our yellow/orange flags, and our green flags sorted. So there are a lot of beautiful websites and Instagrams. I'm going to highlight my friend in sex ed and relatability, and my disabled sex is the top 3 that I would recommend, where you need to have a bit of an identification of what is considered like more harmful in terms of traits versus the more, this is a great sign, just because we are more susceptible to and vulnerable to harm. So that would be the first thing. But navigating dating generally as well. Figure out what environments you actually can tolerate. If you are going to go to a club and that's not the type of environment that you really like, don't go to the club. You shouldn't have to be forcing yourself into an environment that's going to overstimulate you. But maybe instead you go to a bar, or maybe instead you go to a more open space or a certain event, depending on the context of what you can tolerate. And really finding and sourcing environments that suit you. Maybe it's online dating. A lot of our neurokin do prefer to meet people online, as it's like a nicer and safer kind of element, but you still want to safeguard against, potentially harmful people, but I won't get into that as a deep dive on that end. But yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest thing. You want to have that, but you want to have goals. What is it that you're looking for in a partner? What type of a relationship is it that you want? Are you someone that wants a traditional monogamous long-term relationship? Are you just looking to try meeting new people and dating different people? Would you like multiple different relationships? So determining what structure of relationship you're looking for, what your goals are. Do you want children? Do you want to get married? Do you want just to have pets? Do you want to live alone? And really knuckling down on the things that you want, so that when you're meeting partners, that you're not going to waver or, kind of change your mind in a way that feels coerced. I feel like it's really important. Yes, sometimes we do negotiate in our relationships, but we shouldn't be sacrificing who we are and trying to be a different person for a partner. So it's really important to have your ideals set before you go into the dating scene.
That's very sort of like, going into a deep dive. I love it. So what are the unique considerations for neurodivergent individuals exploring non-traditional relationships?
Okay, so the first thing is you're going to want to read and research. Deep dive on the internet, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's through books. Whatever it is that you'd like to do, if you're trying to enter into a non-traditional relationship, you want to have a thorough knowledge base. A lot of individuals also like to source through Reddit for information. I take it with a grain of salt if you go on Reddit, but it's really about educating yourself so you kind of know the rules ahead of time. The best thing about non-traditional relationships is that there are lots of rules, which a lot of us can find helpful, because that way we can establish certain things that we want, the timing of things as well. So this is about, a lot of individuals would like, so for example, kink relationships. It's really important that if they're entering into that they understand how to vet a certain type of person when they're meeting them. And there are rules as well, which are established and communicated beforehand, before scenes happen. There's a lot of communication that goes around, which is really beautiful. And the same for polyamorous and ethical non-monogamous relationships too, where people actually have so much communication. And look, infidelity can happen across any form of relationship, but with these types, there is hopefully a little bit more like mitigating and structuring around it, where you're coming up with shared mutual agreements so that it feels fair for everybody. And so it's really about recognizing that when you're going into that, you want to look at, once again, going back to yourself, are you someone that gets jealous? If so, you're still welcome and entitled to be into these relationships, because everyone gets jealous. But how are you going to navigate that? Do you have your own psych to be able to support you through this when you are experiencing more of those? How can we step into spaces of compersion when jealousy comes up? So compersion being the joy of witnessing a partner indulge in joy from another person other than ourselves. So I think it's really about researching, seeing if it's the right fit for you, and giving it a go if you are open-minded. A lot of people find it really, really helpful for them because they get to maintain a lot of their routines and structures on their own as well. But if you're dating more people, you just want to keep in mind that that might impede upon your ability to have alone time and regulation. So there's a lot of things to consider.
So how can neurodivergent individuals communicate their sensory needs and preferences to their partners?
Well, there's very many different ways that you can communicate that. I like to do like a date night style sensory profile quiz, but that might just be because I'm super geeky about that kind of stuff. But really asking questions with each other, even doing like a sensory night where you bring out your favorite smells or you talk about things that might be overwhelming for you. You can try and do different forms of touch. Like you could make it an actually very connected experience in that way. You could do it and fill out a form. You could get a sensory profile measure that you do in your own clinical work with a psych or an allied health clinician that tells you, and then you can bring it back and discuss it with your partner. Or if you know yourself quite well, you can just unpack it. So you can do it on that kinesthetic, touch-based learning in real time style thing. You can have the discussion on a verbal front, or maybe you just find out as you go as well, which most couples often they're not do.
Okay, so what resources are available for neurodivergent individuals seeking to improve their intimacy skills?
Okay, so I will say the little bit of the sad news, which is there's not really too much out there. Not yet. There is still stuff being built, but I think because it's such a new emergence in the field around intimacy, neurodivergence, there is still a lackluster of neuroaffirming kind of resources. But going back to my friend in sex ed, relatability, my disabled sex, there are a lot of beautiful resources through their pages. Neuroconnection, I've built a whole bunch of resources as well as webinars that discuss things like this as well, and how you can navigate this within your partnership. There are a lot of professional development for allied health clinicians that want to learn more about it as well. So there are still some things out there. But I also am a very big advocate of, if you have the capacity, of course, you can make resources for yourself too, where it's specific to you. But my website has loads of those and some recommendations as well for pages if anyone would like to search that up.
Okay, so how can neurodivergent individuals balance personal interests with relationship commitments?
Okay, so the balance is a tricky one to make, but I want to come back to this idea of interdependence rather than codependence, rather than independence. We do want to remain ourselves as authentically as we can be, but whenever we enter into a partnership or a relationship, we are going to naturally, fuse a little bit of our lives. The way that you can do that is you get to make up the rules of your relationship. You need to make time for your special interests or the things that you're engaged with, and it doesn't actually need to involve your partner. There's actually a very healthy amount of space that you can take from your partner without it being a bad thing. So if you're someone that feels guilty about taking time away from your partner, I think it would be about learning to work through that guilt, because you do want to actually have time for your special interests. You can create routines. You can create calendar dates where you're organizing, this is a day that I'm going to spend with you, but this is a day that I'm going to allocate for myself because I really want to do something for myself. So, keeping everybody in the loop ahead of time of your plans around that, making sure that you have your own circle as well, whether it's one friend, whether it's a few online friends, it doesn't matter how big or small, but just having other humans that you can connect in with too is really, really important to maintaining that sense of self and identity. And alone time just generally to decompress from socialization, because it's pretty exhausting, especially if you're going to have the emotional chats with partners. It can be pretty big there. So taking some space as well, cool down time as well if there's been conflict for a few days, so long as it's, repaired and has been brought to, you're entitled to taking space so long as you're communicating how long you're going to need and that you're going to come back, and then doing that and following through.
Okay, so what support systems are available for neurodivergent individuals and their partners to strengthen their relationships?
Well, the support systems are pretty limited, and I think a big part of that is due to the lack of funding, particularly in Australia. But I do know that for mental health care plans, you are entitled to up to 2 sessions where you can have a partner come in as an additional person. So they can't come in technically for couples therapy, but they can come in as a supporting, so that, you can bolster supports around them both so that they understand about one of the partner's neurotypes. Resources online, Instagram is an online hub for so many partnership supports and how to navigate that. Online courses, our retreats are a really great thing to be attending if you're someone that's wanting to have some additional support in that way. But also creating community groups. There are lots of community groups for people that are neurodivergent and in neurodivergent partnerships. And I find that community is probably the best way to feel supported at this time.
So what are the upcoming retreats that you like to promote? I know there's one coming in Byron Bay early next year. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So we already have one spot that's been taken, and I think we're waiting on confirmation for our second. But we're taking on 4 to 5 couples, and it's called the Roots of Connection. And so this is really going back to identity, neurodivergence, looking at our neurotypes, how we celebrate that first and foremost, and then going from individuality to being a couple, looking at your partnership as this beautiful whole. How can we identify what our differences in communication are, what our differences in our sexuality is, what our differences in our different emotional processing is, and then bolstering them with support, strategies, workshops to foster and facilitate connection at a deeper level. We cater all meals, there's a pool, there's a spa. It is a little bit intensive because there's a lot of information that's kind of packed into those. So we try to make it a really nice location so that people can at least semi-relax while they're getting a whole info dump at them. But it's really facilitative discussion as well. So everyone feels that we've had so far has felt really comfortable to share their experiences. And I think that's been the whole really binding ingredient there, is that when other people are sharing their experiences, they know that they're not alone. So that is a little bit of what's in store. We're going to be focusing as well on some more of the sensual intimacy aspects. It's a 3-day retreat for next year as well, and we'll have one again in October. But yeah, we're really, really excited. So if anyone's interested, feel free to give us a DM because we're still taking on some humans.
Yeah, so basically they're held in Byron Bay and down in Victoria, is that correct?
That is correct so far. We are looking to kind of spread them out as much as we can all over Australia.
Oh, sounds fantastic. I look forward to it. And very final question that we'd like to ask everybody here on the Deep Dive podcast. If you have 30 seconds of basically, if you have one bit of advice in 30 seconds or less, what would that be?
Okay. Focus on learning yourself before you get into a partnership. I think it's really important to, in the terms of neurodivergent identity, you want to understand who you are, why you are, what's happening, what your triggers are, your interests, your passions, and really focusing in on your identity first, because then you can bring so much more to your partnership that you're entering into when you're able to look after yourself. That's where we can actually then fill up a cup of a partner or partners. And so I think self-identity is such a crucial piece. So if you're learning to unmask, keep unmasking, keep doing what you're doing, but focusing on yourself first, I think is probably my highest recommendation.
And on that note, Lil Desille, thank you very much for being part of the Deep Dive podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Michael. I appreciate it loads.
For more information, go to www.neuroconnection.com.au or on Instagram at neuroconnection. Also check out more resources at our show notes page.